Hey, what's happening guys, and welcome back to Rule of Two Review. So I'm actually doing something a little bit different and pretty fun today. This video will actually be part one of a two-part series discussing the concept of a Nintendo Switch 2. And so what we're doing is posting this video today, which is part one, why Nintendo shouldn't make a Switch 2, and tomorrow's video will actually be part two on why Nintendo should make a Switch 2. So for anyone watching this video the day that it goes up, you'll actually have to wait a day for the second part of the conversation. But for anyone else watching it in the future, you'll actually have access to both videos, and both videos will be linked in the description of each, so that you'll have access easily to the full scope of the entire conversation. And now it's really important that I give you guys, of course, that preface, so that this isn't seen as some sort of hate or trolling kind of video. I can definitely see people jumping to the comments, especially because I'm starting off with the whole shouldn't concept with part one on why they shouldn't make a Nintendo Switch 2. But again, I want to cover both angles, and I want to cover it fully and give proper attention and discuss all of the different concepts to both, so I decided to do it in two parts in two different videos. So if you happen to see this video first and you just hate the idea and you're so needing to see the Nintendo Switch 2 and how dare you talk about why they shouldn't make a Nintendo Switch 2, well, don't worry, because that is why this is a two-parter, and part two will of course be discussing why I think Nintendo should. That's what's really cool about this idea, and why I love making videos on these kinds of topics, that there's a lot of different aspects and opinions and angles to come at something like this from. So let's just explore both sides of the equation. And so, let's dive into part one and discuss the couple of reasons that I decided to discuss in today's video on why I think Nintendo maybe shouldn't make a Nintendo Switch 2. Now, of course, the whole concept of this two-part video series is really exploring this random guess of a future of Nintendo. It's a little silly to talk about what Nintendo is going to do beyond the Nintendo Switch, because it's literally less than a year old. We're just a few months away from the one-year anniversary. I'm sure we will get at least 4 solid and excellent years out of the Nintendo Switch. So we're literally talking like 2021 and beyond. It is probably too early to do this, and I certainly don't want to be part of taking the attention away from the Nintendo Switch while it is brand new and so freaking awesome with an incredible launch lineup of so many good games within its first year. This isn't about detracting from that. Hopefully 2018 is going to be continuing to be a fantastic year for the Switch. But it's just fun to talk about the future. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just fun to think about this stuff and speculate and try to guess on what Nintendo is going to do next. While there are probably a couple of ideas internally within Nintendo on what they're planning on doing after the Switch, they probably haven't even fully decided on the concept. Do they want to do a Switch 2 and continue the handheld hybrid idea and just move on to the better version of it? Or are they maybe thinking about backing off of that? That was meant to be just a one-time deal for the sake of the Switch, and they plan on going back to a more traditional home console setup in the future and maybe splitting off into the console and the handheld thing. Who even knows? So we're definitely looking a little bit far into the future, but like I said, it's just fun to do so. So let's discuss the couple of reasons why I think Nintendo probably shouldn't think about making a Switch 2. So there are many reasons why, but I want to start with 3 today. That's the point of this video. 3 main bullet points I want to discuss on why I think it might not be a good idea for Nintendo to make another handheld console hybrid like the Switch. And the biggest one, not the biggest, the first one would be probably the power difference, because I feel like in a world where Nintendo wants to continue doing what they did with the Switch, we might be looking at Nintendo for another generation. I mean, it would be the 4th generation in a row at this point, where Nintendo would be willing to make hardware that is sacrificing comparable power compared to its relative competitors on the market at that time. And I know what you're thinking, like the Switch is an incredibly powerful device. Whether it's a home console or a handheld or the hybrid that it is incredibly competent and has a lot of power. That's absolutely true. I think it's fantastic. It gets the job done. It can run games like Doom and Wolfenstein 2 and whatever other crazy things Nintendo is going to continue to give us. By the time we see Metroid Prime 4, I'm sure we will have our minds blown with how good the graphics are. But if we think about a Nintendo Switch 2, a sequel to the same idea, the next generation version of it in 2021 or 22 or what have you, we have to remember, within that same time, both Sony and likely Microsoft will have also already jumped to their next platforms. So if we're looking at, let's pretend it's a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox 2, the sequel to the Xbox One and the One X, Well, those are going to be some pretty mammoth powerhouses. Those guys are not going to be willing to skimp on power because it's all they ever do. It's all they ever have. I mean, I love those consoles and those companies, but let's be real. That's really all they have is the power race and the arms race. Nintendo operates outside of that spectrum and uses great, innovative, wacky ideas and controller ideas and amazing first-party software as their tools of the trade, where Sony and Microsoft are always fighting the power game. Nintendo has fought the power game in the past, you guys. We can't forget that. And we can't pretend like Nintendo has never cared about power and graphics, and that they might not ever care about power and graphics again. And there's an argument to be made that if Nintendo was to go with the next version of the Switch in 2021, sure, it's going to be a hell of a lot more powerful than this Switch, but is it going to be able to match up to the Xbox 2 and the PlayStation 5? If they want to make it a similarly comparable price, probably not. Because if they were going to try to release a handheld hybrid console in 2021 that would be just as powerful as a PS5, that's probably going to be a $600 or $700 device. I mean, I'm no expert when it comes to components, but I understand it well enough, having been a gamer for over 30 years. I know that it would be extremely expensive, even in the future. So I think Nintendo could even still be successful that way. They've done it several times in a row. I absolutely believe Nintendo doesn't need to fight the power game. But at some point, people might start to eventually get sick of always knowing they've got the Nintendo console that struggles to keep up, which does hinder some third-party support, even though we're seeing that gap bridged with the Switch, which is great. I would like to see that gap bridged even further along by their next console, whatever it is, be able to compete even that much more closely with Sony and Microsoft at the time that it launches. I can't imagine a Switch 2 is going to be powerful enough to do so, so maybe if Nintendo's looking at another handheld hybrid, it might not be good to do so, because the power might yet again have to be sacrificed. Now, another thing that I think we need to address when thinking about Nintendo making a Switch 2 is the file sizes of games. Basically, the actual data size of where games are going to be. As of right now, the size of games, as far as downloading them, adding patches, installing them when you buy physical, whatever the case may be, the size of games right now in, January 2018 is insane. It's obscene, actually. It's borderline insulting how big games have to be right now. And I mean, hey, if they have to be that big, they have to be that big, and we're all dealing with it every day and deleting stuff off of our hard drives or our SD cards in our Switches or whatever and making room for games and all these different things, but they're only going to get bigger is the thing. When we think about the next generation, a PS5, an Xbox 2, a Switch 2, whatever Nintendo does, games are only going to get bigger. And this more applies to the third-party stuff. We all know Nintendo is magic and they work brilliance when it comes to making their own first-party games and compressing that data so fantastically that they can get Mario Odyssey into a 5 gig file size when you put it into your Switch, compared to other games that come out at 32 or 40 gigs from third parties. It's ridiculous. But the thing is, that's probably not going to change anytime soon. So again, if we go to 2021 or 2022, once we get into the next generation of video games and consoles and hardware, those file sizes ain't going to be getting any smaller, guys. And at that point, 4K is probably going to be much more of a standard than it is today, which means file sizes might even be bigger on average than they are nowadays. That could prove to be a problem for Nintendo if they went with the Switch 2, because I'd have to think there's a 98% chance that a Switch 2 is going to also demand cartridges for its physical game sizes. Now, there's a weird world where they go Switch 2 and then they maybe even also go all digital. Yes, that is possible. I would hate to see that, but it is very possible. However, let's pretend like that's not the option that they would go with, and they would continue with the Switch 2, and they would continue with physical little cartridge cards the way Switch games are right now. Well, if we look at the Switch situation right now with third parties, it's maddening, because we're dealing with files that are so huge on the third-party front. Sometimes they're not even putting all of the game on the physical cartridge. You get half the game on the physical cartridge, and you have to then still download the rest of the game, which sometimes creates files for games that are so big they wouldn't even fit on the Switch out of the box. You have to expand the memory to have even the one game on your Switch. And then we get into the fact that, well, sometimes based on the size of Switch game cartridge, 16 gig, 32 gig, are we going to get 64 gig in the future? Those are also costing the developer so much that that cost is getting passed on to the Nintendo consumer. And some games are costing $5 or $10 more for the Switch version than they are for the competitors. That is a barrier of entry that the Switch and Nintendo gamers have to deal with, that Sony and Microsoft gamers right now simply do not. I mean, the quality of the games is not what we're talking about, just a barrier of entry of, hey, they always cost this price on the Xbox and the PlayStation. Sometimes on the Switch, you're going to pay a little bit more to play these games. Do you want to buy into that or do you not? Is portable gaming worth that extra buy-in price or is it not? And I'm sure a lot of people would say no to that. So if Nintendo goes Switch 2 and they continue to go cartridges, they would only continue to run into this problem. And for all we know, just guessing, we can only predict based on, 4 or 5 years down the road in the future. For all we know, the file size has become so big and the game cartridge size has become so big that gap in price might be bigger. Maybe the average Switch game is even $15 or $20 more than the Xbox or PlayStation game. I mean, I don't know. We can only riff and spitball on these ideas, but it could be a feasible future. Who knows? And it's something I don't want to see happen, and I'm sure a lot of you Nintendo and Switch fans out there wouldn't want to see that happen as well. We don't want to pay more money. We don't want to deal with more companies continuing to say for a 4th generation in a row for Nintendo, it's too hard, it's too much money, the media you use doesn't work, it's just too much of a hassle to get our games compressed and delivered onto your Nintendo console, so we're going to be skipping the Nintendo Switch 2 for this game, and for this game, and for this game. And we'd be dealing with the same old Nintendo third-party problem. So that's a huge thing I think we have to consider, is really the size of those downloads files. Now, one last main bullet point I want to talk about as far as Nintendo and the idea of a Switch 2 and why Nintendo maybe shouldn't want to consider doing it. And this will be a little bit divisive, but I believe in this category. And I think it's that Nintendo would potentially be losing out on being able to again control both a home console and a handheld market at the same time with separate devices. Now, that's one of the unique and actually great things about the Switch. So this is a tricky one because it kind of could even be skewed into reasons why they should continue to do it based on the success of the Switch. But let's explore it a little bit deeper. When we look at the Switch right now, one of the many reasons it is so insanely successful is because they were able to take everything they did great with their home consoles and everything they did great with their handhelds, which we know Nintendo in the handheld market, they are an unstoppable monster when it comes to handhelds. They were able to combine all of those factions, all of those resources in development, and make an amazing machine that is console quality, but still portable and handheld, and that has created this incredible phenomenon that is the Switch. And so Nintendo was able to kind of simplify their business model and kind of bottleneck their market into one device, taking their 2 markets and putting them into one, which is creating, like I said, an amazing phenomenon and a fantastic piece of hardware that, oh my goodness, I love to death. It's becoming one of my favorite consoles of all time, and Nintendo's success shows. That being said, maybe Nintendo doesn't want to or can't successfully do that forever. There's the possibility that trying to repeat this idea might not work. Once it's not novel, another 4 or 5 years down the road, a new device doing the same thing might not have the same appeal, and they might not be able to continue that same kind of market, at least to the same level of success. Again, we're only guessing and predicting here, guys, so don't lose your heads over some of the stuff I'm saying here. And so what we could be seeing happening instead is Nintendo, after gaining so much positive ground, selling so well, sort of, I don't know, saving their name, so to speak, or saving the face of who Nintendo is as a company, improving their image throughout the gaming industry and to other gamers, and showing, hey, we are a viable competitor, we make fantastic products, everyone knows and loves and respects Nintendo again after a couple of really bad years, and we've got the money and sales to prove it. Well, maybe they want to take all that success and the renewed interest in Nintendo as a brand and try to, again, split it back off into 2 markets and maybe do that successfully. And what could be happening is Nintendo would be able to have their next home console and everyone's excited and they love it and they remember Nintendo's great, the Switch was cool, Nintendo's games and consoles are great, so let's buy into their new home console. And then they could also split back off into another fantastic handheld that essentially does kind of all the great things the Switch does, only a slightly better version of that. And suddenly, they can control 2 markets again and do it at the same time. We have to remember, we have a bad taste in our mouth with this idea because we remember, well, the Wii U and the 3DS, where the 3DS was doing great, sure, and keeping the company afloat, but the Wii U was drowning. And so I think when we think about the idea of Nintendo having a console and a handheld at the same time again, we immediately go back to the last couple of years where Nintendo failed at that, and they weren't able to maintain that success. However, I challenge you to go back just another few years. Go back another generation to when the first DS and the Wii were out. You want to talk about massive success. You want to talk about the most unstoppable beast in the entire industry. It was Nintendo when they had the same level of Switch success when they had the Wii and the DS. Two family of consoles and hardware that sold over 100 million units each within the same span of time, in the same couple of years. Imagine Nintendo doing that again. Imagine in 2022, Nintendo has a new home console and a new handheld, and all of the success and positive ground they gained with the Switch applies to both, and they have two markets and two pieces of hardware selling fast and crazy and with all these great games, and everyone's buying them and loving them, and they've got two markets covered all over again. Some challenges come there as well, of course. I mean, I know, we understand they split their resources again. It might be harder to get portable games made at the same time console games are getting made. I know. All that stuff is true. So it's impossible for us as people who aren't business people and people who work in the industry to predict how well that could go. But I'm telling you, man, I go back to the Wii and the DS years and I think about Switch success, but doubling it up, having two pieces of hardware, covering two different markets, and that's pretty exciting. And I think that Nintendo likes that idea as well. And if they do a Switch 2, bring it back here, if they do a Switch 2, well, they'd be losing that opportunity. And maybe Nintendo's whole game plan the whole time was to filter back down to one device, try to be successful with that before going back and filtering into two devices again. Maybe. Again, just guessing, but I think it's some interesting food for thought. So yeah, there's probably a couple of more ideas that a lot of us could discuss as far as Nintendo going into Switch 2 territory and why maybe it wouldn't be the best idea and they shouldn't consider it. But I wanted to focus on these three main bullet points today. So I definitely invite you guys to check out tomorrow's video, which will be part 2, where I discuss all of the reasons why Nintendo should consider making a Switch 2. Because again, that's the cool, fun thing about a topic like this, is there really are two sides to this coin. They both have merit in different ways, and it's fun to discuss them both, give credibility and viability to the two ideas, and then consider what we would prefer, and then go back to not caring because it's going to be another 4 years before we even have to worry about it anyway. So that's what's up. Again, tomorrow part 2 will be out, but if you're watching this in the future, which most of you probably will be, part 2 will also be linked below. So go ahead and discuss below what I talked about today, the reasons why Nintendo shouldn't make a Switch. Do you agree with these reasons or have other reasons on your own? Or are you just super against it? You hate me, you downvoted the video because you can't wait for tomorrow's video where maybe I discuss the ideas that you would actually agree with. So discuss this whole thing below. Tune in to part 2 tomorrow. Thanks so much as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.